Most people slicing into a loaf of bread every single morning have absolutely no idea what is actually sitting inside it. We investigated 10 of the biggest bread brands sold across the United States. Independent laboratories and state health departments pulled these loaves straight off ordinary grocery store shelves and sent them to certified testing facilities for full chemical analysis. The results that came back showed something almost nobody standing in that bread aisle would ever expect to hear. Glyphosate, the active weed-killing chemical inside Roundup, was detected in the finished bread itself. Not out on the farm where the wheat originally grew, but inside the loaf you are slicing open and feeding to your family morning after morning, day after day. And here is exactly what nobody working inside the industry seems eager to tell you. Some of the worst results did not come from the cheap discount store brands at all. They came from loaves proudly wearing clean, wholesome, health-forward labels. The ones marketed straight at careful families. The ones people pay extra money for specifically because they believe they are making the safer, smarter choice for their children. One brand tested well above 1,000 parts per billion of glyphosate. That is one of the highest levels ever recorded in any packaged consumer bread anywhere in the country. And you are going to recognize the name the very moment you hear it spoken aloud. We are counting down all 10 brands, moving from mildly concerning all the way to genuinely shocking, and then finishing with 3 brands that came back completely clean and are actually worth putting into your cart. Let us get right into it. Number 10. Great Value Whole Wheat. This is Walmart's own house bread. The one that fills millions upon millions of carts every single week because it is cheap, familiar, and always sitting in stock no matter which store location you happen to walk into. Before you ever open the bag, try something incredibly simple. Press down on the loaf firmly with the flat of your hand. It genuinely does not feel like bread. It compresses completely flat and then bounces straight back up again like a foam cushion that somebody carefully shaved into the form of a loaf. That right there is your very first clue that something engineered is quietly happening inside that plastic package. The Detox Project and the Environmental Working Group found roughly 340 parts per billion of glyphosate inside Great Value whole wheat through independent laboratory testing. Regulators will be very quick to reassure you that number is perfectly legal. The EPA ceiling for glyphosate on wheat sits way up at 30,000 parts per billion. But that ceiling was calculated for one single chemical, in one single food, for one healthy adult, consumed in complete isolation from everything else. It was never designed to account for someone already taking blood pressure medication, already absorbing glyphosate from their morning cereal, already getting more from their afternoon crackers, and now adding it yet again at dinner with a sandwich. Exposure quietly stacks up inside the human body. The regulatory math simply does not stack up the same way. Walmart generated over $713 billion in revenue last year. Sourcing cleaner grain is not a real financial constraint at that kind of enormous scale. It is a margin decision, plain and simple. The 80 cents you thought you saved arrived carrying something extra that was never printed anywhere on that label. Budget price, contaminated grain, and the very next brand costs you significantly more money while delivering the exact same underlying problem. Number 9. Market Pantry Organic. This one genuinely surprises people the moment they hear it. Target spent years carefully positioning itself as the smarter, cleaner, more thoughtful alternative to everyone else in the retail space. Better packaging design, more intentional sourcing, the store that young families deliberately choose because it simply feels different from an ordinary supermarket. Their Market Pantry whole wheat sandwich bread proudly carries a USDA organic seal right on the front of the bag, and it tested at roughly 348 parts per billion of glyphosate in independent laboratory analysis. That is higher than Wonder Bread. That is higher than Nature's Own. An organic loaf actually outscoring conventional bread in raw contamination levels. Here is exactly how something like that happens. It is called drift contamination. When a conventional farm sitting right next door to an organic operation sprays herbicide across its own fields, that fine chemical mist does not politely stop at the property fence line. It travels on the wind. USDA organic certification only verifies that the producer themselves did not intentionally apply glyphosate to their crop. It does absolutely nothing to verify that none of it arrived from a neighboring field, carried quietly on the breeze. Drift testing is not required by any law, and Target does not publish any. So a parent reaches for this specific loaf precisely to protect their kids from chemicals. They pay the premium price. They see that reassuring seal. The certification itself is completely legitimate, but the contamination inside is also completely real. The law that would require anyone to disclose the enormous gap between those two things simply does not exist in this country. Organic label, 348 parts per billion, and zero required disclosure. That is not consumer protection. That is a hole the industry has quietly decided to leave wide open on purpose. Number 8. Or White Organic. This is the craft brand that quietly stopped being one while nobody was paying attention. Two families started baking bread together in Los Angeles all the way back in the 1930s. It was, for decades, a genuine regional institution, family-owned, California-made, and completely obsessed with quality. Then Grupo Bimbo acquired the entire thing. Since that day, Bimbo has also absorbed Arnold, Sara Lee, Entenmann's, Thomas, Ballpark, and dozens upon dozens of other names. One single multinational corporation now controls what most shoppers still genuinely believe are independent, competing brands fighting hard for their business. When Bimbo absorbs a brand, the supply chain follows right behind it. Same flour suppliers, same wheat sources, the same grain potentially pre-harvest treated with glyphosate as a drying desiccant across their broader industrial network. The Environmental Working Group reported around 70 parts per billion of glyphosate in a Rowette whole grains bread back in 2018. Bimbo did reformulate certain products after those results went public and made headlines. But there has been no publicly available independent glyphosate testing on a Rowette Organic since that time. The last number sitting on record is still that 70 parts per billion figure from 2018. Bimbo generates over $20 billion in annual revenue. If they are quietly testing every single batch, they have certainly not published those results for you to see. Longtime customers describe the old pre-acquisition bread as denser, grainier, more interesting, and far more varied in its texture. What sits on shelves today is uniform, soft, and specifically engineered to hold that softness through a very long retail window. You are paying for the logo printed on the bag. Almost everything else was replaced years and years ago. Number 7. Nature's Own. Flowers Foods is one of the absolute largest bread companies in all of America, pulling in around $5 billion a year in revenue. Nature's Own is their flagship product, and that name is doing an enormous amount of heavy lifting. Natural, wholesome, a bread that quietly implies it came from somewhere intentional and carefully considered. In early 2026, Florida's Department of Health tested Nature's Own butter bread. The result came back at roughly 190 parts per billion of glyphosate. Their perfectly crafted white variety came back around 132, but glyphosate is genuinely only one part of the story. Read what else is packed into that loaf. Calcium propionate, a preservative that peer-reviewed research has connected to behavioral effects in children. DATEM, a chemically modified fat used specifically to strengthen dough structure. Sodium stearoyl lactylate, an emulsifier that maintains that engineered softness for weeks past any natural freshness window. Squeeze the bag just one time. That pillowy give you feel is not freshness at all. It is a formulation. A video spread widely across the internet showing someone filling a single slice of Nature's Own with water, wringing it out completely, and then watching it spring right back to its original shape without tearing at all. That is not bread. That is a sponge that somebody shaped into a loaf. A class action lawsuit was filed in California federal court alleging that Flowers Foods falsely marketed certain Nature's Own products as containing no artificial preservatives, while ascorbic acid appears right there on the ingredient label. Flowers has denied the allegations. At $5 billion in annual revenue, cleaner sourcing is not out of reach for them. It simply compresses the margin, and margin is exactly what gets protected. If this loaf is sitting in your kitchen right now, you already know what you have been eating. And if this investigation is already changing how you look at your bread aisle, you are only about halfway through. The next few brands are where things start getting far more serious. Number 6. Arnold Organic. Arnold has been sitting on American shelves since 1940, and when the organic line launched, health-conscious shoppers saw it as the answer they had been waiting for. A legacy brand finally living up to its longtime reputation. USDA Organic printed right on the front. Whole grains listed first in the ingredients, the exact combination that signals trust without ever requiring any further investigation from you. Arnold is owned by Bimbo Bakeries USA. The same parent company as Arrowweight, the same enormous $20 billion industrial operation. Here is the very specific problem. Sara Lee has been independently tested for glyphosate. Nature's Own has been tested. Dave's Killer Bread has been tested across multiple years by multiple independent labs. But Arnold Organic, coming from the exact same parent company that owns all of them, has no publicly available glyphosate test results that we could locate anywhere at all. We are not claiming Arnold's numbers would match Sara Lee's worst result. We cannot make that claim because the data simply does not exist publicly. But what we can say is that Bimbo's track record across every other brand they control makes this particular silence very difficult to explain away. They paid for the organic certification. They just have not shown you what that certification actually delivers inside the bag. The ingredient list adds important context. Organic soybean oil, organic cane sugar, cultured wheat flour, ascorbic acid. These are not the components of traditional bread that your grandmother would recognize. The slices come out geometrically uniform. The texture holds for weeks at room temperature. Real bread simply does not behave like that. Arnold carries a strikingly low rating on major consumer review platforms. Shoppers report bread that is dry the very first time they open it, quality that keeps declining year over year, and a price that just keeps climbing higher and higher. 85 years of brand equity and no public test data. That combination is not reassurance. It is a question the company has quietly decided you do not need answered. Number 5. Wonder Bread. Wonder Bread does not claim to be organic at all. It claims to be the American family staple, the loaf your grandmother trusted, the one that belongs on every kitchen counter in the country. Florida's Department of Health tested Wonder Bread Classic White. It came back at roughly 173 parts per billion of glyphosate. Now read the ingredient label right alongside that number. Calcium sulfate, the very same compound used in construction drywall. Sodium stearoyl lactylate. Monocalcium peroxide. Enriched bleached wheat flour, stripped completely of nutrients, bleached, and then fortified back up with synthetic vitamins to replace what the processing took out in the first place. Grab a loaf in the store and it collapses down to almost nothing under your hand, then fully recovers its original shape. That behavior is the ingredient list expressing itself physically right in front of your eyes. Wonder Bread is owned by Flowers Foods, the same parent company as Nature's Own, running the same supply chain quietly behind the scenes. And the long-term math genuinely matters here. 2 slices a day for 40 years works out to close to 30,000 individual servings. That is breakfast toast, the lunch sandwich, and the bun at every single backyard cookout for 4 straight decades. Exposure accumulates inside your body the exact same way. But here is something genuinely worth knowing and holding on to tightly. Your body begins reducing its chemical load the very moment you stop adding to it. The next clean slice you eat matters far more than every contaminated one sitting behind you. Wonder Bread sold you a grandmother's kitchen and quietly delivered something she never once would have recognized as actual food. Number 4. Sara Lee Honey Wheat. Sara Lee has been in American kitchens for a full 70 years now. Birthday cakes, holiday desserts, warm childhood memories. Honey wheat is their sandwich loaf. Honey right there in the name. Wheat on the label. Warm golden packaging that signals something wholesome and carefully made by people who genuinely care. Florida's Department of Health tested Sara Lee Honey Wheat. The result was roughly 191 parts per billion of glyphosate. That was the single highest reading in Florida's entire testing round. Higher than Wonder Bread in that same laboratory. Higher than Nature's Own. Sara Lee posted the absolute worst number in Florida's published data. Sara Lee is owned by Bimbo Bakeries USA, the same parent company as Arrowweight and Arnold. Now read the label very carefully. Honey is right there in the product name, but corn syrup is what is actually listed in the ingredients. One of those is marketing. The other is what is genuinely sweetening the bread. Keep reading, and you find calcium sulfate, that drywall compound again, sitting right alongside monoglycerides and DATEM. For anyone out there managing type 2 diabetes, that formulation is actively working against blood sugar control with every single slice they eat. A video spread widely showing a piece of Sara Lee bread sitting out at room temperature for over 3 straight months with absolutely no visible mold. Week after week after week, completely unchanged. Bread that flat-out refuses to spoil was designed for a warehouse shelf, not for a human body. Highest glyphosate reading in the state testing. A sweetener that directly contradicts the brand name. 70 years of hard-earned trust sitting on top of all of it. And the very next brand charges a serious premium for heritage. It stopped honoring a long time ago. We are getting close now to the brands that will genuinely surprise you. Number 3 in particular is a product an enormous number of people consider the single healthiest option in the entire aisle. Stay right with us. Number 3. Pepperidge Farm. The red bag. The old-fashioned lettering. The name that sounds like a country property with a stone wall and a kitchen garden out back. Pepperidge Farm has been baking since the late 1930s. It is the bread people reach for when they want something that feels like a genuine step above everything else on the shelf. Pepperidge Farm is owned by the Campbell Company, pulling in over $10 billion in annual revenue. Independent laboratory testing found roughly 587 parts per billion of glyphosate in Pepperidge Farm 100% whole-grain whole wheat bread. Their Jewish rye and pumpernickel deli swirl tested around 531 parts per billion. That is nearly 3 times what Nature's Own recorded in Florida's testing. Now, it is worth noting that Pepperidge Farmhouse Hardy White showed no detectable glyphosate at all in Florida's testing. The brand is not uniform across all of its products, but their whole grain and rye lines are among the most contaminated branded breads in any independent testing we reviewed anywhere, and the reason behind it is very specific and genuinely worth understanding. Glyphosate is frequently used as a pre-harvest desiccant. Some conventional farmers spray Roundup directly onto their standing grain crops to accelerate the drying process before harvest. That final application, happening just days before collection, concentrates the residues directly in the outer hull of the kernel. Whole wheat bread retains that hull, which means a product marketed to you as the healthier choice can actually carry higher contamination than white bread made from flour that stripped the outer layer away entirely. Choosing whole grain, in this specific case, sometimes means choosing more chemical exposure, not less. The manufacturer of glyphosate, Bayer, which acquired Monsanto, has paid roughly $11 billion to settle nearly 100,000 lawsuits filed by people who developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma. Bayer has proposed a further settlement worth billions for current and future claims. Bayer continues to firmly deny that glyphosate causes cancer. Pepperidge Farm carries a very low rating on major consumer platforms. Shoppers report a chemical off-taste, a noticeable decline in quality, and shrinkflation that reduced the loaf weight from 22 ounces down to 14, while the price held perfectly steady. You are paying a heritage premium for grain sourced the exact same way as every other industrial brand on this entire list. Number 2. Dave's Killer Bread. This is the brand health-conscious shoppers reach for with complete and total confidence. Bold graphic packaging, dense seedy loaves, a founder's redemption story printed right on every single bag. USDA organic certified, non-GMO project verified. Nutritionists post about it online. Personal trainers recommend it to their clients constantly. It is sitting in millions of kitchens right now because the people who bought it genuinely believe they have already solved the entire bread problem for good. Then the lab results came back in. The Alliance for Natural Health found roughly 136 parts per billion of glyphosate in Dave's Killer Bread whole wheat. Florida's Department of Health found around 11.8 parts per billion in their white variety and around 10.4 in their 21 whole grains and seeds. Now those numbers are genuinely lower than the conventional brands. And that is the precise issue at hand. Lower is not the same thing as zero. A brand that has built its entire identity on being the gold standard of organic bread and charges a price to match that reputation has made a very specific promise to you. This is not a close call. It is a broken promise. You are not paying a premium for almost better. Flowers Foods acquired Dave's Killer Bread back in 2015 for around $275 million. Distribution expanded almost immediately from a regional Pacific Northwest operation to a nationwide scale through the Flowers direct store delivery network. The founder's story stayed printed on the bag. The industrial supply chain moved in quietly right behind it. Dave's Killer Bread is owned by Flowers Foods, the same $5 billion corporation that owns Nature's Own and Wonder Bread. Same parent company, same sourcing infrastructure feeding all of them. The packaging looks independent. The ownership structure absolutely is not. A class action lawsuit was certified in California federal court, alleging that the company misleads consumers about protein content on the front labels of certain varieties. Flowers Foods has denied the allegations. Consumer reviews include complaints about texture drier than crackers and document a confusion about whether the sprouted grain claims reflect what is actually in the loaf. Some people buy Dave's Killer Bread specifically because it is the only bread their body tolerates. That makes the gap between what this brand promises and what the lab actually found more serious, not less. And that brings us all the way to number 1, the brand that made us seriously question whether any label in the entire bread aisle means anything at all anymore. Number 1. 365 by Whole Foods. Amazon owns Whole Foods. Whole Foods sells the 365 brand organic bread. Independent laboratory testing found glyphosate at roughly 1,040 parts per billion in 365 whole wheat sandwich bread. 1,040 parts per billion. That figure appears near the very top of every independent test database of branded consumer bread we reviewed. Whole Foods built their entire identity around what they proudly refused to sell. Bromated flour, banned. Artificial colors, banned. Acrylamide, banned. Their published list of unacceptable ingredients contains over 80 different substances. Every single part of the store experience communicates one clear message to you. Here, the standard is different. Here, you can trust what you buy. But the test result does not match the message at all. Amazon acquired Whole Foods for roughly $13.7 billion. Since then, multiple former executives have spoken publicly about what changed internally afterward. A former vice president who spent well over a decade at the company is among those who have publicly described a more centralized, more industrialized supply chain replacing the sourcing philosophy Whole Foods was originally built on. Decisions driven by logistics metrics rather than ingredient standards. Reviews of 365 bread consistently describe a dry texture, heavy crumbling, and slices structurally closer to cardboard than to actual bread. Multiple shoppers report holes large enough to make the loaf completely useless for sandwiches. The industry's response is entirely predictable. They will quickly point out that 1,040 parts per billion is still below the EPA's legal ceiling of 30,000. What they will conveniently not mention is the peer-reviewed research showing that ultra-low doses of Roundup below the levels regulators currently measure for in human food produced measurable changes in gene expression across thousands of transcripts in the livers and kidneys of laboratory animals, not industrial doses, not occupational exposure. Ultra-low below what the current regulatory system even bothers to track. Those tolerances were designed for a healthy adult in their 30s consuming one chemical from one food, not for someone in their 70s managing blood pressure, cholesterol, and thyroid medication all at once, adding bread residues on top of their cereal, crackers, and pasta across the same single afternoon. You did everything right. You paid the premium price. You chose the store with the sterling reputation. You picked the house brand organic loaf specifically because you trusted what the store stood for, and the laboratory found weed killer inside it. If the retailer that built its entire brand on refusing to ever compromise cannot keep its own bread clean, what exactly does that tell you about everything else sitting in that aisle? Now that you know exactly what to avoid, here are the 3 brands that actually held up under real scrutiny. These are not consolation picks or afterthoughts. They are brands that test their own products, publish the results openly, and source their grain differently from the ground up. Best option number 3, Food for Life Ezekiel bread. Start with something most people genuinely do not know. There is no flour at all in Ezekiel bread, none whatsoever. Food for Life sprouts several organic whole grains and legumes, wheat, barley, millet, lentils, soybeans, and spelt. Then bakes them slowly at carefully controlled temperatures to preserve their nutritional density. This is not a reformulated industrial loaf with better marketing. It is a fundamentally different process from start to finish. Food for Life carries the non-glyphosate certified seal. This certification does not just verify a process, it verifies an actual result. Glyphosate residues in the finished product are undetectable at the laboratory's detection limit. That is the standard every single brand on the avoid list should be held to and simply is not. Ezekiel bread scores far lower on the glycemic index than typical white bread. For anyone managing their blood sugar, that is a genuinely meaningful difference, not a minor one. The ingredient list has only a handful of items, all of them recognizable as real food. No added sugar, no preservatives, no dough conditioners, no compounds with construction applications. Fruit for Life has been family-owned and baking in California since the 1960s. No multinational acquisition, at least not yet. One honest corporation doing it right. The texture is nothing at all like the breads on the avoid list. Dense, chewy, hearty. Most people find it tastes best toasted. Look for it in the freezer section, not the regular bread aisle. Without any preservatives, this loaf will mold at room temperature. That is not a flaw. That is proof positive that you are holding actual food in your hands. Best option number 2, 1 Degree Organics. 1 Degree does something almost no other bread brand in America even bothers to attempt. They publish the exact farm source for every single ingredient they use. Scan the code printed right on the bag and trace the wheat all the way back to the specific field where it was grown. Not the country, not the region, the individual farm itself. 1 Degree carries the non-glyphosate certified seal and, according to the company, submits random product samples to accredited third-party laboratories every single month. No regulation requires this of them. No law demands it. They do it because testing the finished product and publishing the results is the only way to actually prove what you are truly selling. The ingredient list reads organic sprouted whole wheat, water, organic whole grain oats, organic cane sugar, yeast, sea salt, organic cultured wheat. That is everything. No DATEM, no calcium sulfate, no monoglycerides hiding anywhere in there. Open a bag and the grain smell hits you immediately. The texture pulls apart instead of compressing and springing right back. It tears. It behaves exactly like something that was baked, not engineered in a lab. Distribution is still fairly limited. You may need a natural grocery store or a direct order to find it. That inconvenience is completely real, and it is also exactly what happens when a brand has not handed its entire supply chain over to a giant industrial operator chasing margins. Best option number 1. Silver Hills Sprouted Bakery. If Ezekiel's density feels like a significant texture adjustment for you, or you just want a clean everyday sandwich loaf you do not have to think twice about, Silver Hills is the single most practical recommendation on this entire list. Silver Hills is a Canadian family-owned company. All of their products carry the non-glyphosate certified seal, with residues verified below laboratory detection limits on an ongoing, continuous basis. When the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic to humans, Silver Hills publicly stated that this classification directly shaped their sourcing standards. That is a company responding honestly to the evidence rather than lobbying against it. Their loaves deliver real fiber, whole grains, and protein per serving. Their Omega variety is a verified source of plant-based omega-3, relevant for heart health. The full lineup is plant-based, nut-free, non-GMO verified, and certified vegan. In the United States, you can find it at Sprouts, Whole Foods, and other natural grocery chains. In Canada, at major national chains. Every batch tested, every result verified, with no corporate parent running a margin calculation that overrides the sourcing standard. Reviewers consistently place Silver Hills among the very best sprouted grain breads available anywhere. One customer with a documented wheat sensitivity noted that her body tolerates Silver Hills when nearly every other wheat product causes her problems. And unlike Ezekiel, the texture is hearty but still soft enough for a sandwich straight out of the bag. It is the most approachable, clean option for anyone making the switch without wanting to completely rethink what bread even feels like. The price is higher than the brands on the avoid list. Availability depends heavily on your region. Both of those trade-offs are real, but they are also the natural result of a company that tests every batch and sources exactly what it promises you. Before you close this, here is the one single rule genuinely worth keeping forever. Stop buying bread that is sold at room temperature with more than 5 ingredients on the label. That single rule alone removes almost every brand from the avoid list right out of your cart. No ownership research required. No lab data to memorize. Standing right there in the store, flip the bag over and count the ingredients. Real bread is flour, water, salt, yeast, and perhaps a small amount of healthy oil. 5 ingredients. Everything beyond that was added to extend the shelf life, simulate freshness, or reduce the sourcing cost. Look right past the USDA organic seal when you see it. It only verifies that glyphosate was not intentionally applied. It does not verify that glyphosate is not in the finished product you are holding in your hand. The certifications that require actual laboratory testing of the finished loaf are non-glyphosate certified and non-GMO project verified. One is a promise about the process. The others are proof about the actual result. Buy from the freezer section whenever you possibly can. Bread that survives weeks at room temperature was built for the supply chain. Bread that hardens or molds within a few days was built for you and your body. If you bake at home, apply the exact same standard to your flour before it ever goes into the bowl. Clean bread costs more, roughly 50 cents a slice at the very high end. That is still considerably less than managing the long-term health conditions that quietly accumulate from decades of daily contamination you were never once told about. In the European Union, pre-harvest glyphosate application is heavily restricted by law. Here in the States, it remains completely standard practice on farms, and the residues it leaves behind sit on shelves right next to organic certifications that were never once designed to catch them. The labels were built to earn your trust without ever actually earning it. Now you finally know exactly how to see straight through every single one of them. If this changed how you think about what is really inside your bread, passing it along to someone who buys these brands regularly is probably the single most useful thing you could possibly do today.